Elara Voss never wanted the Kincaid fortune, until the night she discovered the first body and realized the empire she inherited was built on blood. Rowan Hale was the man everyone trusted with security, but when the empire began to crumble, he became the most dangerous person in Elara Voss's life. Quinn Marlow had been Elara Voss's closest ally, until his mysterious death exposed a secret she was never meant to uncover. Mira Kessler knew the truth behind the Kincaid empire, and the moment she tried to warn Elara Voss, she vanished without a trace. Magnus Kincaid left his empire to Elara Voss, but he also left behind enemies who believed she should never have lived to claim it. Bria Lorne wasn't part of the Kincaid family, but she became the only person Elara Voss could trust as bodies began to fall around them. Eamon Rusk handled the finances of the Kincaid empire, and when Elara Voss uncovered his secret ledgers, she unknowingly triggered a chain of murders. Jalen Crow investigated corporate crimes for years, but nothing prepared him for the trail of bodies leading back to Elara Voss's inheritance.
Elara Kincaid never imagined her life would change in a single afternoon. At 22, she lived in a small apartment in Bloomington, Indiana, balancing college classes with a part-time job at a corner cafe. Her days were simple and predictable. She woke early, reviewed notes for her business courses, rode her bike across campus, and spent her evenings serving coffee to regular customers who barely knew her name. She liked the routine. It made her feel safe. Nothing in her world hinted that she was connected to one of the largest industrial empires in the Midwest. Her distant relative, Magnus Kincaid, was a man she had only heard about in passing. He was known across Indiana as a powerful, secretive billionaire who built steel factories, shipping hubs, and logistics centers in nearly every major city. People spoke of him with a mixture of awe and unease. He rarely appeared in public, guarded his private life fiercely, and ran the Kincaid Industrial Group like a fortress. Elara never met him in person, and she never expected to. To her, he was just a name mentioned during family gatherings, a figure whispered about but never truly discussed. Everything changed the day a legal courier arrived at her apartment. She almost didn't open the door, thinking it was a delivery for someone else. When she finally accepted the envelope, she felt uneasy at the weight of the documents inside. The papers explained that Magnus Kincaid had died unexpectedly of a heart attack. What shocked her even more was the final statement. She had been named the sole heir to his entire empire, including his sprawling estate, all corporate assets, and full ownership of the billion-dollar corporation. The news spread faster than she could process it. Reporters appeared outside her apartment. Neighbors whispered. Her phone flooded with calls from people she barely knew. Overnight, she became a national headline, the accidental heiress who inherited an empire she never touched. Elara felt overwhelmed, confused, and strangely guilty, as if she had stepped into a life that didn't belong to her. Within days, corporate advisors escorted her to the Kincaid mansion, a massive property hidden behind stone gates and acres of thick forest. The building was enormous, too grand, too silent, too intimidating for someone who grew up in a two-bedroom rental home. The hallways stretched endlessly, lined with old portraits and dim lights that flickered when she walked past. Servants greeted her politely, but she saw unease in their eyes, as if they knew things she didn't. The mansion carried a weight she couldn't explain. Some nights she felt cold drafts in rooms with closed windows. Other nights she heard footsteps in empty hallways. Staff whispered about strange noises, unexplained lights, and locked doors that occasionally stood open in the morning. Elara chalked it up to her imagination, yet the feeling lingered. Her first weeks as head of the corporation were a blur of meetings, signings, and introductions. The board members expected her to be a clueless young woman, but she studied tirelessly. She learned about shipping networks, manufacturing contracts, tax obligations, and international accounts. Her advisors expressed surprise at how quickly she adapted. A few even began to respect her determination. Still, she sensed tension among the executives. Some avoided her eyes. Some smiled too easily. Others whispered in corners when they thought she wasn't listening. Rumors surfaced about questionable activities in the company's past, missing workers, abandoned factories, and secret projects that never appeared in official reports. Elara tried to investigate, but every answer seemed half-complete. Despite her newfound power, she felt isolated. She lived in a mansion full of people, yet felt completely alone. She inherited enormous wealth, yet carried a growing sense of dread she couldn't explain. Deep inside the mansion, behind locked doors and dusty archives, something waited to be uncovered. Something connected to the Kincaid empire. Something Magnus never wanted the world to see. And only weeks after she moved in, the first murder shattered whatever sense of safety she still had.
The first murder occurred quietly, almost too quietly for an empire as large as the Kincaid estate. Elara woke before sunrise to the sound of rushed footsteps echoing through the halls. Voices muttered in panic down the corridor, and although she could not make out the words, there was urgency. An urgency that did not belong in a mansion known for its strict routines and controlled order. Moments later, a house attendant knocked on her door with trembling fingers, insisting she stay inside. But the warning only deepened her fear. By mid-morning, news reached her despite the staff's attempts to contain it. Quinn Delaney, the mansion's longest-serving groundskeeper, had been found dead near the eastern greenhouse. Quinn was known for his loyalty to the Kincaid family. He had worked on the estate for nearly 30 years, tending to every inch of the property with quiet devotion. His death was officially labeled an accident caused by a fall, but the staff spoke differently when they thought Elara was out of earshot. Some said he had been pushed. Others said he had been targeted. Elara tried to dismiss the rumors, but unease settled deep in her chest. Quinn had been one of the first people to welcome her warmly to the estate. He had told her about the history of the gardens and pointed out the older sections of the property that Magnus never allowed visitors to enter. He had a calming presence, a sense of trustworthiness. Now he was gone. The estate's head of security, Rowan Hale, briefed her privately. Rowan was a serious man with a rigid posture and a stern face carved by years of military experience. He claimed the estate had no signs of forced entry, no suspicious activity on cameras, and no reason to suspect foul play. Yet Elara noticed the strain in his voice. He avoided her gaze whenever she asked direct questions. There was something he wasn't telling her, something tied to the darker corners of the Kincaid legacy. The mansion's atmosphere shifted sharply after Quinn's death. Workers who once moved with routine confidence now glanced over their shoulders. Conversations stopped when Elara entered a room. Even the long hallways lit with warm antique lamps seemed colder than before. It was as if the estate itself knew something terrible had awakened. Elara tried to continue her corporate duties, hoping work would distract her. She met with board members, reviewed contracts, and toured several Kincaid facilities, but everywhere she went she felt watched. Employees whispered about the heiress with unnatural curiosity. A few seemed sympathetic, while others observed her with calculating eyes, as if measuring her usefulness or her vulnerability. She found some stability in her growing professional relationship with Bria Solterra, the company's chief financial analyst. Bria was sharp, composed, and fearless in her assessments. She gently guided Elara through the tangled financial history of the empire. Together, they sorted through decades-old documents, uncovering discrepancies that seemed too intentional to dismiss as clerical errors. Bria hinted that Magnus had shielded certain operations from oversight, possibly to protect secrets buried within the company. One evening, Elara discovered an old ledger sealed inside a locked drawer of Magnus's study. The entries were written in coded abbreviations and numbers. Several names appeared repeatedly, crossed out, rewritten, and sometimes followed by dates and locations. Quinn's name was one of them. She didn't know what the entries meant, but she knew they were important. She hid the ledger in her room, afraid to show it to anyone. As days passed, the unease grew stronger. Strange footprints appeared in the dew near her window. Lights flickered in deserted hallways. Doors she swore she had closed stood open in the morning. Staff members avoided certain wings of the mansion after sunset, muttering about noises that didn't sound human. Then, Rowan announced that an internal investigation into Quinn's death had concluded, another attempt to label it an accident. But the staff did not believe it. Bria didn't believe it. And deep inside, neither did Elara. She began to feel trapped inside a legacy she barely understood. She inherited wealth, power, and influence, but also secrets, enemies, and danger. Her instinct told her that Quinn Delaney's death was not an accident. It was a warning. And whoever sent it was not finished yet.
Elara's suspicion hardened into certainty the moment the second murder struck the Kincaid estate. It happened late at night, a time when the mansion usually sank into stillness except for the soft hum of distant generators and the occasional footsteps of night staff. But that night, the stillness shattered. Security alarms blared from the west wing, red lights flickered violently against the stone walls, and hurried voices filled the halls with panic. Elara left her room, despite Rowan's strict warning days earlier to remain inside after dark. Something inside her demanded answers. She was met halfway down the hall by Bria Solterra, pale and shaken. Bria tried to keep her voice steady, but fear trembled underneath. She reported that a senior accountant, Mira Kessler, had been found in the archives room. The section was considered one of the safest, protected by biometric locks and limited access. Yet someone had bypassed every layer of security. Mira had been reviewing old financial records because Elara had asked her to help decode the ledger from Magnus's study. Now, Mira was dead. The official report that reached Elara claimed heart failure, but the staff whispers were louder than before, filled with fear so raw it clung to the walls. Several workers claimed Mira's body was found in a state far too violent for a natural death. Others claimed she had tried to escape moments before the alarms triggered. Some believed she had discovered something hidden in the archives, something someone didn't want her to learn. Elara felt guilt pressing heavily on her shoulders. Mira had been helping her. Now she was gone. Just like Quinn. 2 people dead within weeks of her inheritance. Both tied to the estate's secrets. Both tied to her questions. Her distrust of Rowan Hale deepened when he refused to let her see the scene or review footage. He insisted everything was under control, yet his tone carried a forceful finality that felt more like intimidation than protection. Bria wasn't convinced either. She quietly pulled Elara aside later that day, warning that internal security might be compromised. She urged Elara to limit her movements and not rely on anyone still employed by the estate before Magnus's death. Bria believed someone from within was orchestrating the violence. As the mansion slipped into an atmosphere of paranoia, Elara began isolating herself. She spent nights combing through the ledger, searching for patterns. The names, dates, and locations seemed random at first, but gradually a shape emerged. Many entries corresponded to obscure shell companies quietly linked to Kincaid Industries. Others aligned with off-record shipments, missing funds, or sudden changes in corporate officers. Magnus had hidden a web of transactions deeper than anything Elara could have imagined.
One recurring coded entry caught her attention: R17. It appeared beside Quinn's and Mira's names. It appeared beside others she didn't recognize. And it appeared beside a date only 3 days away. She circled it, unsure if it represented a place, a person, or something entirely different. But she knew, instinctively, it was important. Her sense of danger heightened when she caught movement near her balcony one night. A shadow shifted outside the glass door, lingering just long enough for her to notice. When she turned on the light, the shadow slipped away into the darkness. Rowan claimed increased patrols would keep her safe, but she no longer believed him. Someone was watching her, learning her routines, waiting. Bria suggested leaving the mansion temporarily, but Elara hesitated. The empire she inherited was unraveling rapidly, and running now might mean losing control of it forever. Yet staying felt like walking deeper into a trap. The turning point came when Elara returned to Magnus's study one evening and found the drawer where she had discovered the ledger, completely empty. Someone had searched it thoroughly. But they hadn't found the ledger because she had hidden it elsewhere. Still, it meant someone knew she had been digging, and they were desperate to know what she had uncovered. Fear transformed into resolve. Quinn and Mira died because of secrets buried long before her arrival. She needed to uncover the truth before the pattern claimed another name, possibly her own. As she examined the ledger again under dim lamplight, she noticed something she had previously overlooked. At the bottom corner of a page, written faintly in pencil, were the initials M.K. They were unmistakable. They belonged to Magnus Kincaid himself. Whatever these records meant, Magnus not only knew about them, he had been the one controlling them. This realization shifted everything. The murders were not simply attacks on the new heiress. They were final echoes of a legacy built on hidden power plays, financial manipulation, and dangerous alliances. Someone who had once worked for Magnus wanted to ensure that none of his secrets surfaced. Elara understood then that she was not just inheriting an empire. She was inheriting every enemy Magnus had ever made. And the closer she got to the truth, the more determined those enemies became to eliminate her next.
Elara could feel the pressure closing in on every side of her life. The mansion that once felt like a symbol of privilege now resembled a labyrinth designed to break her resolve. Quinn's death had been unsettling. Mira's death had been terrifying. But the growing silence within the staff was something else entirely. It was as if a veil had been pulled over the entire estate, one woven from fear, secrecy, and hidden loyalties she could not yet understand. Her trust in Rowan Hale deteriorated with each passing day. His presence felt heavier, and the way he appeared unexpectedly in hallways made her question whether he intended to protect her or watch her every move. The guards he hired did not seem like ordinary security personnel. Their movements were too rehearsed, their eyes too calculating. They monitored doors Elara had always been free to pass through, recorded the license plates of her visitors, and insisted she inform them of her schedule in advance. She had inherited an empire, but Rowan behaved as if she were the outsider. Bria became the only stable force around her. She kept her grounded, reminded her of what she had already uncovered, and insisted that everything connected back to Magnus's hidden network. Bria believed the coded entry in the ledger, R17, was not a person at all, but a location tied to illegal financial operations. As they dug deeper into old accounts, unusual payments resurfaced again and again, always linked to a restricted property owned by Kincaid Industries. When Bria traced the ownership documents, she discovered they had been signed by Magnus personally, something he almost never did for minor facilities. The fog of uncertainty lifted slightly when Elara found a map inside one of Magnus's locked file boxes. It was hand-drawn, annotated in his handwriting, and marked with a symbol matching the coded entries in the ledger. The warehouse was real, and whatever was hidden inside was significant enough that someone had already killed twice to protect it. Leaving the mansion became a mission in itself. Rowan insisted she stay inside after dark and discouraged any visits to outer properties, claiming the threats against her were growing. His warnings might have sounded protective to anyone else, but to Elara, they felt like barriers meant to confine her. She didn't trust his motives anymore. So when Bria suggested a discreet trip to the location tied to R17, Elara agreed without hesitation. They planned carefully. Bria waited until the mansion was distracted by a routine inspection Rowan had ordered in the south wing. The guards had been instructed to stay on alert, but that worked to their advantage. Their attention was directed inward, not toward the old service tunnel Bria discovered on outdated estate maps. The tunnel, unused for years, connected the mansion's basement to a concealed maintenance shed behind the gardens. They slipped through it in silence, emerging behind the tall hedges where no cameras reached. The warehouse was farther than expected, isolated on a stretch of land surrounded by dead trees and uneven ground. It looked abandoned, but Elara noticed details that contradicted the appearance. The grass near the entrance was pressed flat. The dust on the metal door handle had been recently disturbed, and faint light spilled from a crack beneath the back entrance. Inside, the air felt stale and heavy, carrying the faint odor of old metal. The interior was lined with crates stacked in columns reaching nearly to the ceiling. Elara approached the nearest crate cautiously, expecting machinery or forgotten equipment. But when she and Bria pried it open, they found stacks of documents, old ledgers, and financial records marked with the same coded labels from Magnus's study. Each crate held evidence of something darker and more calculated than either of them had imagined. Fraud, payoffs, manipulated audits, offshore accounts, names of politicians, law enforcement officials, and business partners, all tied to Magnus. Quinn's signature appeared on several maintenance logs, suggesting he had once transported or stored these crates. Mira's name appeared on a list of employees flagged for having too much information. Elara felt dread coil around her spine. These documents weren't just damaging, they were explosive. They were the reason Quinn and Mira had died. They were the reason someone inside the estate wanted her silenced. As she reached for a binder in the next crate, a soft metallic click echoed across the warehouse. It wasn't the creak of the old structure or the settling of crates. It was deliberate. A door had closed. Bria extinguished the small flashlight instantly. Darkness swallowed them whole. Footsteps followed, slow, unhurried, purposeful, moving between the crates with confidence. Whoever had entered the warehouse wasn't searching. They were approaching. The footsteps stopped just a few paces away. Then a calm, familiar voice drifted through the dark, making Elara's blood run cold. They had not arrived alone. Someone had followed them. And that someone was exactly who Elara feared.
The voice in the darkness sent a wave of shock through Elara's body. It was Rowan Hale. His tone was controlled, steady, carrying the cold authority of someone who had been waiting for this moment far longer than she had known. Bria stiffened beside her, barely breathing. Rowan took a few more steps forward, the faint beam of his tactical flashlight slicing through the dark like a blade. Elara pressed herself deeper into the shadows between the crates, her heartbeat loud enough to drown out everything else. Rowan moved with unnerving calm, as if he already knew exactly where they were hiding. He spoke in a low voice that reverberated in the vast space, explaining that Magnus had entrusted him with more than security. He had been the silent architect behind protecting the Empire's darker operations. Magnus didn't trust corporate executives or politicians. He trusted only Rowan. And now that Magnus was dead, Rowan believed it was his duty to preserve the Empire's foundation at any cost, including eliminating threats. Elara understood in that moment that she and Bria were never meant to inherit knowledge of this warehouse. Magnus had kept the existence of R17 from most of the board, and Rowan intended to erase anyone who discovered it. Quinn and Mira had stumbled too close to the truth. Rowan had handled them. Now Elara had walked straight into the same trap. Bria squeezed Elara's arm, urging her silently to retreat deeper into the rows of crates. They moved carefully, avoiding debris that could give them away. But Rowan heard the faintest shift of a crate panel and turned sharply, his light sweeping across the aisle. For a split second, it nearly caught Elara's foot, but she ducked into a lower section behind a crate. Bria followed, crouched low. Rowan's voice grew firmer as he continued his monologue. He said the ledger Magnus kept was never meant to be decoded. It was a map of control, blackmail, payoffs, alliances built through fear. The R17 warehouse was the archive of those secrets. Rowan believed that exposing any of it would destroy the Empire, the stock value, the company's global reputation, and every deal Magnus had forged over the years. He claimed that protecting the Empire meant protecting its darkness. He stepped closer, his flashlight beam now cut across the crate directly beside Elara. Bria clenched her jaw and swiftly reached for a metal rod resting near one of the shelves. Elara shook her head silently, but it was too late. A sudden metallic clang erupted when Bria knocked into a tool as she reached for the rod. Rowan spun instantly toward the sound. Bria bolted first, darting out from the crates. Rowan's flashlight locked on her instantly as he shouted for her to stop. Elara, driven by instinct, sprinted after them through the maze of crates. The warehouse echoed with Rowan's heavy steps pounding after them. Bria reached the far exit door and shoved it open, but Rowan closed the distance astonishingly fast. He grabbed Bria's arm and yanked her backward. She stumbled, falling hard onto the floor. Elara skidded to a stop, torn between fleeing and helping. Rowan raised a weapon over Bria, and instinct propelled Elara forward. She grabbed the nearest crate lid and slammed it into Rowan with all the strength she had. He staggered, dropping the weapon, and Bria scrambled away. The two women sprinted out the door, slamming it behind them. But Rowan recovered quickly. The warehouse shook as he rammed the metal door, trying to force it open. Bria fumbled with the keys, hands shaking, until the lock engaged. Then they ran. They didn't stop until they reached the hidden road leading back to the estate. Bria called an emergency contact outside Kincaid's circles, a federal investigator she had quietly trusted for years. She explained everything. Within hours, federal authorities descended on the R17 site and seized the crates. Rowan disappeared before they could reach him. Elara provided the ledger, her testimony, and every document they recovered. Investigations revealed a multi-layered criminal network tied to Magnus Kincaid. Board members were arrested, shell companies dissolved, assets frozen. The empire did not collapse, but it transformed. Months later, Elara rebuilt Kincaid Industries from the ground up. She dismantled every illegal branch, rewrote every contract, and donated large portions of Magnus's hidden wealth to victims harmed by the company's former dealings.
Yet Rowan Hale was never found. Late some nights, Elara would notice subtle shifts around her house, a door slightly open, a faint footprint on the porch, a shadow lingering near the tree line. He was still out there, not to protect the empire, but because, in his mind, she had destroyed it.